Hello my wonderful, beautiful friends, welcome back to r/ProRevenge, where in today's episode you'll hear one long story. You'll hear a story about two siblings in the foster care system where they were tormented by an evil, disgusting woman who became their foster mom. Guys, this story is really long, so make sure you have some time to listen to it all, because it's a wild ride. It's also one of the darker stories that I've read on the channel, with a super satisfying ending. So, with that said, I'm throwing out a disclaimer right now. If darker stories do not interest you, I'll link you to yesterday's episode right here if you missed it. If you're still with me and ready to dive in, grab a drink or some snacks because it's a long ride. Oh, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button, my friends, for future revenge stories. So, background. The story I want to tell you is full of sadness and heartache. I started out life in poverty living with my parents in a house that had some wooden floors, but mostly dirt floors. My mother has a long list of mental issues, and my father was an alcoholic, and thankfully not the abusive type. Me and my sister were taken from our home when I was 7 and she was 4. We got placed into the foster care system in Kentucky. I'm not going to use real names, but I will use the initials of their names. It's my understanding that at the time, foster parents in Kentucky could have up to 4 kids per room, and they did not have a limit of how many a single foster parent could keep. Linda's home was a long house with 6 bedrooms, and she was keeping at least 8 kids at the time. In the foster care system, it's not uncommon to see a child stay with us for just a week and then be released back to the family, so we had different kids come and go all the time. The foster home we went to was run by a woman who we'll call Linda, and she was a widow. Her husband had passed away in the 80s. She had 4 sons and 1 daughter. Her youngest son, who we'll call Jay, was still living with her because he had fallen from a truck when he was a kid and damaged his skull. This caused him to have a learning disability, and he could not read or write, and at the time of me living with them, he was about 26 years old. Her other son Chase was the oldest, and he was a plumber. Another son is Dean, and he owned 5 large farms and ran a grocery store. The 4th son was Cody, and he died in the 80s from being shot. Her only daughter was Sandy, and she was very kind to us. When we entered the foster care system, it was a really scary time for us, and I'll never forget the screams of our parents as they ripped us from our home. Because we didn't have running water and electricity, the old barn that we made into a house wasn't suitable for children, according to our social worker. When I first arrived at the new house, I had a broken wrist and had my arm in a cast. The first thing we did was go shopping for clothes, as I didn't bring any with me. When we returned from shopping, I put my things away and was then given a trash bag and told to go outside and not come back in until all the loose trash was picked up. Just to let you know now, this was more of a work camp instead of a loving and caring home. While I was picking up trash, Jay was in the swimming pool they had beside the home. He yelled for me to come to him and asked me if I wanted to swim. I told him I did not know how to swim and I can't because of my broken arm. He then grabbed me and tossed me into the pool and I screamed for help. I really felt like I was gonna die that day. He took his time but jumped in and pulled me out. He told me to stop crying, and in his words, if I were to drown, no one would have cared because I did not matter. I remember his words like it was yesterday. When I finally got to bed that night, I couldn't sleep, and I cried the whole night missing my parents. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a hard 12 years of life to come. When I first arrived, I was told by Linda that another boy will be sharing my room with me, and he was away at camp for the week. I arrived at her house when school was out for the summer. His real name was not Ben at all, but we'll call him Ben. Ben had been in the home for a while, and he was about to turn 18. And when you turn 18, the foster care system lets you go, as you're a full-grown adult now. When he returned from camp, he was a very large guy, and I'm guessing about 6'2" and 230 pounds. When I first met him, things seemed to be fine, but it was that first night of him being back that he tried to assault me. I have a hard time sleeping as is because every day I wanted to leave and be back with my parents. He got up from his bed, that's on the other side of the room, and then got into mine. He then held my nose shut so I couldn't breathe, and I had no choice but to open my mouth. He then pulled his pants down, and I think you can imagine what happened next. As he did this, I did bite him, as it was the only thing I could think to do. He jumped off me and smacked me so hard that I was knocked out and don't remember anything else. The next morning, when I got up, with my face hurting and my mouth busted, I ran to tell Linda what he did to me. She took me into her bedroom to talk about it, and I told her everything. When she confronted him, he said that I was trying to steal his money, and he smacked me for it. I told her that's not true, and he checked his wallet for his money and couldn't find it. He demanded his money back, and Linda searched my pockets. She pulled out a $20 bill, and she knew that I had no money. She told me I was going to be punished and made me scrub the front porch. Ben had put his money in my pocket after he knocked me out, and I have no idea what else might have happened to me during that time. That night, I cried and was sitting by the bedroom door in fear of being hurt again. I did this for a few nights and did not get any sleep. I was falling asleep outside doing work and getting in trouble for it. One day, I'm in my room playing with Hot Wheels that another foster kid let me have. Ben walks in, closes the door, and I just start screaming. He quickly jumps on me and covers my mouth. Linda's outside doing something and doesn't hear me. He tells me that if I scream again, he'll have no choice but to smack me. I really can't do anything. I don't know what else would have happened to me because Linda came back inside and called for him to do something. This time, I didn't lay and cry at all. I just laid in place thinking about what to do. I decide that I'm not going to let him keep hurting me, so I go to the kitchen and sneak a knife into my room and put it under my pillow. That night, he gets up and jumps into my bed. He told me to remember what will happen if I scream or resist. I tell him I understand. I take the knife from under the pillow and hid it under the covers. He then grabs my head and starts pulling me close to him, and that's when I let him have it. I slashed him as many times as I could. He quickly disarms me and runs out of the room into the bathroom. I run to wake Linda and told her what happened, and she called 911. She told me not to say a word to the cops about what happened and to go back to bed. Ben and Linda told the cops that he'd been sleepwalking and he didn't mean to cut himself. She told me if I came out of my room and say anything to the cops, they wouldn't believe me because I'm a liar. After this happened, Ben never came back, and I don't know what happened to him, but I knew I wasn't going to ever let anyone do that to me again. Being told that you were worthless, didn't matter to anyone, you'll never be anything, was commonly said from Jay and Linda, as they used that to demoralize the kids. They treat all the foster kids this way and would tell us that we're lucky to be living with them, as this is the only way that we would not be in jail. They told us if we ever left, we would end up in jail because we're just as worthless as our parents. I was also threatened to be put in a boys' home away from my sister if I ever told anyone about how Linda treated us. At a young age, you don't know any better sadly, and you're scared to think otherwise. Remember that this foster home keeps boys and girls from all walks of life. Also remember that Linda's 20-something son Jay lives with her as well. One night, I was up going to the bathroom when I could hear faint crying. The crying was coming from the girls' room, and I went to find out what was wrong. I opened the door to find Jay on top of a girl that was about 16 years old or so. I ran to tell Linda, and he quickly ran out of the room after me. All of the noise woke Linda up, and Jay told her that he had caught me sneaking into the girls' room. At this point, I'm about 10 years old or so, and I try to explain to her what happened. She told me I'm telling lies and that I should be ashamed of myself. She told me that Jay would never do such a thing, and I was in serious trouble tomorrow. I was punished to clean out this old crappy garbage bin they have behind the home, and it was full of loose garbage from the bags getting ripped. The garbage bin was built of wood pellets, and it was really large. They refused to give me gloves to pick up the trash, and as you might know, trash normally has food in it too. Of course, all of this is rotten and full of maggots. It took me about 6 hours to clean it out. Later that week, when we went to the social worker's office for a visitation with my parents, I told the social worker what happened to the girl, and she pulled me into a private room to talk about it. I told her everything that was happening, and she told me she'll stop by tomorrow when we get home from school for a surprise visit. What I found out later in life is that the social workers in my county hated conflict and paperwork, so they would always give the foster homes a heads up on visits. The next day when we arrived home, her car was sitting in the driveway. When I walked in, she took the girl out to her car to have a talk. While the social worker was away, Linda tells me that she knows what I've done, and I'm gonna wish I had never opened my mouth. The social worker comes back with the girl and sits in the living room with Linda, Jay, me, and all of the other foster kids. She goes on to tell us the importance of telling the truth and makes an example out of me. She told the other kids not to tell lies like I do, as it causes unneeded stress and issues for everyone. After she left, Linda told me that she's gonna make me pay for this, and it might not be today, but one day. Remember this phrase, it might not be today, but one day. When I turned 16, I had been in the foster care system for about 8 years, and my parents finally signed us over to the state. My social worker told me that she's gonna place us in line to be adopted, and we'll be visiting with new parents in the following weeks. I was very heartbroken, but also excited as I couldn't wait to get away from Linda and her family. Weeks go by, and we never get to visit anyone, and I start getting worried. One day, Linda comes to school to pick us up and tells us that we're getting adopted today. I was really confused because we hadn't met with anyone. We arrive at the social worker's office, and I go in with Linda. We go into a room where my parents are, and the paperwork is on the table. Because I was 16, I had to sign paperwork stating that I understood what was going on. The social worker tells me that Linda is going to adopt us, and I start crying on the spot. I tell them I would rather be dead than be adopted by her, and the social worker told me she understands my anger because I hate to obey the rules. She was convinced that I was hating Linda because I was a rebel and the normal teenager who hated following rules at this age. I told her it's not true, and she says she knows it to be true and she doesn't want to hear me tell any more lies. My parents are both crying and they've already signed the paperwork weeks ago. Linda signs hers and I refuse to sign mine. The social worker told me if I don't sign it, it doesn't change anything as I'll still be adopted by Linda. On the way home from the social worker's office, Linda looks up in the mirror and gives me a long gaze that I'll never forget. She then says, "I told you one day you'll pay for what you've done, and that day has arrived." I felt chills run down my spine, and I was really in complete shock. Even as I type this out now, I still get that same chill running down my spine, and I can see her eyes glaring at me in the mirror. Now that she's adopted me and my sister, we were no longer protected by the foster care system. With foster kids, you're not allowed to lay a hand on them to discipline them, and now that we're adopted, that's out the window. Now, things take a turn for the worst. When Linda gets mad, she would throw things at me, hit me with coffee cups, remote controls, chairs, anything else she could get her hands on. At this point, I felt broken and alone. My sister was treated like a princess, and it's because she arrived at the home when she was 4, so she only knows Linda as her only parent and always did what she commanded. My sister at the time had no real understanding who Linda was and how awful her family was. My sister was over the moon about being adopted and having Linda's last name. My sister was basically brainwashed into thinking that Linda could do no wrong and that I was just a troublemaker. I felt like I had lost the only family I had. She was my everything, and I sacrificed so much because I never wanted to be separated from her. My grand plan in life was to turn 18 and go live with my parents away from Linda and her family. It wasn't long until after I was adopted that my father was diagnosed with cancer in his throat. I was crushed by this news as my father was my hero. I was only with my parents until the age of 7, but they truly loved us and provided for us the best they could. My parents had never raised a hand to us growing up, and they treated us with love that kids need. At this point, we were doing home visits with my parents as it's not easy for my father to travel. My father's been fighting with cancer for a little over a year at this point. One day, we're home for a visit with my father and he's in really bad shape. My father lasted a few days and passed away from his liver shutting down. I was able to see him before he died and he could squeeze my hand to let me know that he could understand me. I made sure to tell him how much I loved him and I promised to make him proud. I'm telling this part of the story because of how Linda and her family reacted afterwards. They told me that deadbeats like my father are lazy people who are good for nothing and draw a check every month paid for by working people. They said it's a good thing he's gone, and now my mother needs to go as she draws a check also. They told me this on the way home from the hospital. I sit in the back of the van in silence and not shedding a tear. I was no longer gonna let them control me and keep me down. I made a promise to myself that I will do everything in my power to be better than them, and one day, I'll show them what my pain feels like. My father passed away on October 25th, 12 days before I would turn 18 on November 7th. My mother was soon after awarded to the state and placed into a nursing home due to her mental illness. The day after we put my father to rest, I started working with my uncle painting barns and sealing driveways. I had plans to go to Houston, Texas and learn underwater welding, as that's where the money was. My uncle was paying me even on days we didn't find work to make sure I had enough money to make it on my own. I had saved up about $1,200 and graduated high school. My uncle had paid a driver to take me and Linda down to Texas. Linda had to go with me because I was under the age of 25, and she had to sign paperwork stating that she would not be helping me with student loans. We set out for Texas, and we're driving her van as my uncle's truck had broken down the day before, and he only had a huge work truck that wouldn't be feasible to take. We get about 4 hours into the trip, and Linda's getting frustrated. She orders the driver to pull over in the next city. He does as she says, because it's her van, and she kicks me out onto the sidewalk. I have a bag of clothes and $1,200 in cash in my pocket. They then take off and I watch them drive away, and I keep watching for a few moments to make sure they're not coming back. I felt a relief sensation rush over my body. I'm free. I'm finally free. Of course, this isn't where I wanted to be, as it's 4 hours south of Kentucky, and it isn't Texas at all. I picked up my bag and walked up the sidewalk, and I'm trying to figure out what I'm gonna do. I could get a bus ticket and make my way down to Texas, but I don't have the first idea where a bus station is. I come across a school in a shopping center and decide to check it out. I walk in and talk with the front desk about getting info on the school. She sends me to talk with this lady in admissions, and I explain my situation. She tells me how I can get funding to go here and how she can get me housing tonight. I go to this 2-year college and get an associate's degree in computer science. I start working for a major computer company right out of college. I save up every dime I can and only spend money when I need to. I buy my first truck with cash a year after starting my job. I was still keeping tabs on my sister back in Kentucky. At this point, my sister is about to get married and I'm gonna walk her down the aisle at the church that Linda always took us to growing up. Please understand that Linda is a big figure at her church and is well respected. This is important to understand for later. I drive up the weekend of the wedding and get a hotel room about an hour outside of where we grew up. My sister's best friend tells me that my sister's fiance is abusive and she wants to call the wedding off, but Linda told her that she couldn't and not to embarrass her at the church. Linda knows how he treats my sister and has told her she needs to obey him as he will be her husband. On the day of the wedding, I walk my sister down the aisle like normal. The pastor does his thing and then says some words, and then comes the part where he asked if anyone thinks that they shouldn't be married, they must speak now. This is where I stand up and say, I object to my sister being married to a drunk. You could hear a pin drop for a moment and Linda's face is blood red. I then go on to say about how Linda knew about the abuse and told my sister she's gonna get married no matter what and to not embarrass her here today. Linda then exclaims that I'm a known liar and everyone knows they can't believe a word I say. The pastor at this point asked me to please leave and my sister spoke up for me. Telling everyone what I said was the truth. Linda was later removed from the church management and asked to please not come back to the church as they don't believe in abuse. It had been about 7 years now from the wedding crash. I'm now married and have a house of my own and living a great life. My sister's married a real man who treats her right and they have a great little girl together. She calls me one day to tell me that Linda's property tax is way behind and they didn't get the tax lien lifted, and now they'll have a tax deed sale of the property. I knew this was my time to strike and pay them back for a fraction of the pain they'd caused me. I show up at the auction and the only other person to show up was Jay and his wife. When he noticed me, he turned pale and then tried to be all buddy with me. I was friendly and he asked why I'm here. I tell him it's to keep the property in the family and I had no problem helping out. I let him know that if I get ownership, I'll pay the taxes for them, so they don't need to worry about this problem ever again. His brother Dean had given him the money needed to purchase the property back, so he had cash with him to pay for the taxes and fees. I told him to keep the cash and let him know that you took care of the taxes. So the bidding starts at a little over $2,000 because of the back due taxes and fees. I bid on it and Jay doesn't. I easily win and now have instant ownership of the property. I go down to the courthouse with Jay and finish all the paperwork. Linda had fallen behind on property taxes because she was giving the money to Jay to pay it. Well, it turns out that Jay is what we'll call a pillhead and was using the money to buy drugs. Linda did not keep foster kids anymore because of her age, and she wasn't allowed to, so they didn't have any money coming in besides disability and SSI. When I arrived to the house, I told Linda how I regret being a horrible child, and now that I'm older, I've grown out of it. I let her know how much of a mother she was to me when I didn't have one, and that I was here to pay her back. I told her that now that I own the property, she'll never need to worry about property taxes ever again. I let her know that I'm gonna remodel her house, but she can't live in it at the same time. She told me she could stay at Dean's house while I'm remodeling, and she was very excited. I told her not to worry about any of the belongings they have, as I'll make sure they're covered up and moved when needed. I tell her that a lawyer will be sending some paperwork to her in a few days. I then hire a lawyer to do an ejectment of Linda and Jay from the property. I don't know if I could have done this a different way, but that was the advice I was given at the time. It took about 2 months for everything to be fully mine and them evicted. With them evicted, and now that all the belongings have stayed in the house for past 30 days, I now own all of it. I got in contact with a local fire department to find out what I needed to do in order to burn a house down on my property. They informed me that it has to be a controlled burn. I'll need a permit to close the road as the home sits near a public road, and I had to have the water shut off and the power disconnected. The fire department gave me a date and time that I was allowed to do the burning, and then coordinated with the sheriff's office to close the road. I got my permit from the city, and now I just had to sit and wait. The day of the fire, I prepped the house with lots of straw inside and made sure to take all the doors down and open all the windows, as I wanted this to burn as fast as possible. I go to Dean's house to visit Jay and Linda. I told them I wanted to take them out by the old oak tree for lunch. This tree was in a field across the road from the home. When we worked on the farm, we would eat lunch in the summer under the shade of this tree. Linda's in a wheelchair and Jay has a bad back so he doesn't move around too well and he almost needs a wheelchair. I drop them off and tell them to enjoy the snack, and I'll be right back as I'm gonna set fire to the old stuff I ripped out of the house. It's really common for people where we live to burn trash. I called the fire department to let them know that I was gonna start the fire and made sure they had the address. I met with the officers closing the road to let them know that I was about to begin and they might encounter some family members trying to get by them, but not to let them. I then went behind and started the fires from under the house with packed straw. I'm standing beside them while they eat and chat with me about life and what I've been doing with my career. It's not too long before the fire starts to peek around the sides of the home. They start screaming about the fire and that we need to call 911. This is when I told them that I had the road closed and the fire department already knew that I was gonna burn my house down on my property. I told them what they're seeing is just a fraction of the pain they'd caused me over the course of my life, and I want them to know what a fraction of my pain feels like, as I could never fully make them understand. At this point, Jay's trying to call his brothers, and I reminded him that I have the road closed and they can't get by. It takes less than 20 minutes for the house to collapse into a heap of junk. The whole time, I'm watching them as they sit and sob. About 30 minutes has passed and the fire's gone, with just smoke and embers glowing. I get into my car and drive back home knowing that they have lost almost everything they have. They did not lose as much as I have, but it was the closest thing to it. Guys, that story was a real roller coaster. I've heard that the foster care system's messed up, and the fact that the foster mom took it upon herself to adopt kids to solely torment them is beyond twisted. I'm so glad that OP was able to get such a beautiful revenge that was both satisfying and legal. I also love how he abandoned them in the end the same way that they abandoned him. Bravo, OP. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /ProRevenge, and boy was that a long story. If you missed the last episode of our /ProRevenge, a jealous manager frames OP for theft and quickly learns that he messed up. Check it out if you haven't, and I'll see you guys in the next one. I love you.